In the 50 years I've been woodworking, I've seen a lot of changes. Woodworking, like many other things, is a constantly evolving field. That's something that bothers us old-timers, often causing the newer woodworkers to think of us old-timers as being out of touch. Just like the younger generation thinks us older folks are out of touch with pretty much everything. Are we out of touch? Well, it depends on what we're talking about being in touch with. Maybe we're not in touch with some of the newer ways of doing things and some of the newer ideas. But then again, the younger people may not be in touch with some of the older ways and the craftsmanship and the pride in building something beautiful that the older folks are. Things have changed. And I have to say, change isn't always good. There's always some good element to change, but it isn't necessarily good for everyone. And it's not necessarily good in all the ways we expect it to be. Society is constantly changing, and technology causes changes. Whenever there's a new technological advance, it causes change of some sort or another. Some of those changes are for the good, like our modern cell phones make it much easier to communicate pretty much anywhere we are. Not only can we communicate with people, we can communicate with them in a number of different ways, including the old Dick Tracy video conference, We can access the internet. We can do a lot of things that you couldn't do when I was a child and the phone was something hanging on the wall in the kitchen. And so that has been a huge change. But along with it, we've lost the ability, to a large part, to speak face to face, to sit down across the table with somebody with a cup of coffee and just have a conversation. You go into a restaurant nowadays and you'll see everyone sitting around the table looking at their phone instead of looking at each other. And the funny thing is sometimes they're doing a text message to somebody sitting on the other side of the table. Why not just talk to them? Is that an advancement? Is that an improvement? Well, not to me. IKEA started in the United States in 1985. The company's actually been in existence since the mid-1940s, but they started here in the U.S. in 1985, a mere 39 years ago. And I'll have to say, do-it-yourself or assemble-it-yourself furniture existed before they came along. I remember as a young man buying furniture pieces at like Walmart, Kmart, that came in a box and you put them together yourself. They were particle board then, now they're MDF, but it's basically the same idea. Okay, but IKEA has taken it much, much farther than what existed back when I was a young man. They've changed the furniture industry in doing that. They're not the only ones that sell you furniture you have to assemble yourself. I've had a number of pieces of furniture I bought from other places that arrived at my doorstep. They carried it in and they said, here, sign here, and I opened the box and it's not put together, or it's not all put together. IKEA taught the furniture industry, you don't have to finish the job, let the customer do it. Is that good or is that bad? Well, it saves us money, so that's good. But if you're not good at putting it together, it could be very bad, okay? They've also changed the furniture industry by providing a huge amount of mass market, mass production, low-cost furniture in a wide variety of styles. And that's good for a lot of people, especially people that don't have a lot of money to spend on furniture. Handmade furniture is expensive. Good quality furniture is very expensive. So for a lot of people, IKEA has been a blessing because it's allowed them to buy things and furnish their homes in ways that they couldn't have done before that. My first home was furnished in hand-me-downs and used furniture, and actually most of my homes through the years have been furnished that way. Even some of the furniture in my house right now is stuff that's hand-me-downs. We've got furniture in here that belongs to my wife's great aunt and great uncle and her great-great-grandmother. And we've got those things because we like old stuff, okay? But we also have used furniture that we've bought, like our master bedroom. The bed is a bed I bought before we got married, and I bought it used. It's a huge four-poster bed that I just fell in love with, and I bought it. If I was to buy all my furniture new, I probably couldn't afford nice furniture. I'd probably be buying low-cost furniture just to have something. The problem with low-cost furniture is that it doesn't last. My desk in my office is low-cost furniture. I bought it at a time when I didn't have a lot of money to spend, and it's the good old vinyl-covered particle board, or actually I think it's MDF, and sure enough, the vinyl covering is coming off. And so I keep taking a a Sharpie and filling it in so it doesn't look so bad, but it's still, I know that it's not really good. And at some point in time, I'm going to have to replace it, probably by building something myself. But you know, no matter how much IKEA has changed the furniture industry, and no matter how much there are people that want that low-cost furniture, there are always going to be people who want real wood furniture, people who want quality, or people who want the handcrafted look and the handcrafted feel. You know, it's kind of funny. We're living in a time when people are complaining about money, but yet people are also spending money on things just because they know it was what they call craft items, like craft pies. I know a guy about 150 miles from here, he's got a pie shop. He sells pies, I'm talking dessert pies, for $35 to $45 a piece. Craft pies. They're good pies. I have a hard time buying the idea that they're worth that much money. Yet people are willing to pay it. The same can be said for furniture. There are people, and it doesn't necessarily mean rich people, there are a lot of people out there who will buy a piece of furniture or buy a knickknack for their home just because they know it was handmade. And that means something to a lot of people. There's a lot of people that want that handmade touch. Now for most of us, we can break woodworking down into three basic areas. And these actually aren't all the areas, but first of all, furniture building. Secondly, making decorative and useful home items. And thirdly, home building and remodeling. Now when I say it, definitely this isn't like, I'm not mentioning boat building here. That's definitely a category of woodworking, and it's its own unique category because many of the techniques used in boat building aren't used anywhere else. I do include in this, though, wood turning and scrolling, which are both decorative items, okay, or can be useful things too. So, but when I'm saying most of it, I'm saying when we think about woodworking, when we think about what we're going to do, it's these three areas. Now, there's always going to be a need for all three of these. Even as mass production increases with its lower quality and its high volume, there's always going to be a need for high quality furniture. As people progress through life, they'll want to replace the cheap stuff that they bought with something better because the cheap stuff isn't lasting, or they just don't particularly like it anymore. They want something that's better. Some people are going to be fortunate enough in their life that they earn enough money that they don't have to buy cheap stuff and they can buy good stuff. Some people just like how that looks. You know, like I said, my wife and I like old stuff. Our home was built in 1940. It's called a craftsman home. And one of the things that marks the homes built in that time period is a lot of built-in cabinetry. And we unfortunately don't have a whole lot of that in this house because it's been extensively remodeled and expanded multiple times through the years. But that's one thing I love about the furniture of that, or the homes of that time period, is the detail work that's put in by the carpenters and making built-in cabinets. Well, there's always going to be a need for that. There are woodworkers who make a living just making built-in cabinetry. They're really not carpenters. They're really not even finished carpenters. They're woodworkers, and that's what they do. That's their business. And so, yeah, there's always going to be a need. Even with mass production, there's just times you need something that's done for just the way you want it. So the big question, and this is what this video is about, is will woodworking ever go by the wayside and be totally lost? Now, I'm sure there are people that are somewhat concerned about that, just like there are people that are concerned about a lot of other old skills going by the wayside. You know, you don't run across too many people that spin their own wool into yarn and then weave their own fabric. But there are people who still do it. People who care about that craft, care about that skill, and invest the time, have invested the time in learning how to do it, and now invest the time in doing it. Maybe it's just a hobby of theirs, but they're keeping it alive. Blacksmithing, which is something that I have an affinity for, mostly because my dad did it, is another skill. There's absolutely no commercial use for blacksmithing today. But yet you still find blacksmiths that do custom work or do it just for fun. My dad apprenticed with a guy named Slim Sperling in Golden, Colorado, and Slim operated a blacksmith shop called Skunk Hollow Forge. It's still in existence. Slim has passed away, but people have carried on the tradition of Skunk Hollow Forge, and they're still training blacksmiths, and they're still apprenticing blacksmiths. And my dad did that. So will that ever die? No, I don't think so. Will there ever be a commercial use for blacksmithing again? Well, not unless the apocalypse comes and the world pretty much falls apart and the grid is gone and we need people to make metal stuff by hand again. Other than that, no, I really don't think there'll ever be a commercial use for blacksmithing. But there'll always be a recreational use, in the sense that there will be people who will have blacksmithing as their hobby, just as well as there will be a artistic use, in that there will be people who are making items via the techniques of blacksmithing, either for their own use, for gifts, or for sale. I know a restaurant in the Colorado Rockies that has a 35-foot long handrail that is a snake, and it's all hand forged by Slim Sperling, the same blacksmith I mentioned a moment ago, including the point of the mouth being open and the fangs hanging down. And they commissioned that piece to go to the upstairs bar area of that restaurant. And I distinctly remember that piece. And so there's always going to be people that are going to do things like that, either for businesses, for restaurants, or just for their own pleasure, for their own home. People who can afford it, and people who enjoy those older things, okay? And there's a lot more of them than you might realize. So there's always going to be a need for woodworking. But different than blacksmithing, in the area of woodworking, there's also always going to be a need for woodworking for the practical viewpoint. I don't think we'll ever reach a point where machines are building homes out of wood. Now, maybe machines like huge 3D printers will be building homes in other ways, out of other materials, but they won't be making them out of wood, okay? One of the great things about wood and woodworking is that wood is a renewable resource. And as such, it's replaceable. The material regrows, and therefore it makes it really hard to replace woodworking with something else. Are there things that are now made out of metal or plastic that used to be made out of wood? Absolutely. You can find them all over the place. But that doesn't mean the wood ones have gone away. Okay? Wood being a renewable resource, it makes sense sometimes to just make some things out of wood. There's plastic furniture around, but I'll tell you what, I'm not real fond of it. I'd much rather have wood furniture than plastic furniture. One, because I love the beauty of wood. Secondly, I think the wood furniture is a whole lot more durable than the plastic, and since I weigh a little more than I should, I'd rather sit on something a little more secure, like a wood chair, than a plastic one. Okay? Now, the wood we're using may change. As a matter of fact, it is changing. If you compare new wood to old wood, you definitely see a difference. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So there's many other old crafts that have remained through the years, even though there isn't a commercial need for them. As I mentioned, blacksmithing is one of my favorite examples of that, but there's many, many others. You know, saddle making saddles for horses is out of leather is still a hand-done craft. There are people who that's their living. They make saddles, and they do. Some of them do an absolutely gorgeous job. As far as I know, there are no factories for making saddles that make saddles in high volume, and that where the part of the work is automated. There are always going to be people who want to maintain the old ways, like I was talking about blacksmithing a moment ago. Some people just want to do it that way. Well, in woodworking, we have those people too. And you know, woodworking has changed. Now, I consider myself a power tool woodworker, meaning that most of the things I do with the power tool. I am not going to hand sand a piece of wood for hours when I can do it in minutes with a power sander, okay? Now, my dad, he'd spend the hours with a hand sanding, but that was him, not me. So there are always going to be people who want to maintain the old ways. Within woodworking, we have woodworkers who are hand tool woodworkers. That's basically all they do. Everything they do, they make by hand tools. Some of them don't even own any power tools. Some of them will use power tools in a very limited way, but the real work of building whatever they're building is done with hand tools and done the old ways. So, you know, that tells us that there's always going to be, or there's likely to always be, those people amongst the woodworking community that are willing to put the effort in to making sure that the old ways survive, and that they're going to do it the old ways. You know, I still use hand planes and chisels, even though those are methods that a lot of woodworkers don't know today, simply because there are some things that are actually easier to do with hand tools. There are times I'll use a hand saw to cut something because it's less effort to grab that hand saw and make a small cut than to set up my table saw or my radial arm saw to make the same cut. It really depends on what I'm doing. Woodworking is the third most popular craft hobby in existence here in the United States. The only things that beat it out are pottery and crochet. So it's not like there's a shortage of woodworkers out there. There's a lot of woodworkers. And I don't think the numbers are really diminishing. If anything, they're going up. I run across new woodworkers every single day, mostly online, who are asking questions, looking for advice. Which tool should I buy? What projects should I do first? How do I learn? That's not unusual. With a constant renewed interest in woodworking, I don't see it going away. Now, many of the tools we use for woodworking are also used for building homes and doing commercial woodworking. So, you know, a table saw, which is a very common tool in our workshop, okay, we're not going to run into a day where table saws don't exist because there's no commercial market for them. There's only a hobbyist market for them. No, there's carpenters use them, cabinet shops use them, furniture shops use them, shops that custom make doors. Places like that. There's a lot of places that use table saws. It's a very popular, very commonly used saw. Now, are there some saws that kind of go by the wayside? Well, yes, there are. The radial arm saw, for example, has been largely replaced by the miter saw. Now, I still use a radial arm saw, mostly because I have one. I've had it for over 40 years. I can't see any reason to go out and buy a miter saw to replace my radial arm saw when I still have the radial arm saw and it still does the job. If I was starting over, would I buy a radial arm saw? Probably not. I'd probably buy a miter saw. First of all, radial arm saws are hard to get. And second of all, a miter saw is actually a safer saw than a radial arm saw. Nevertheless, you can still find used radial arm saws on Facebook Marketplace, and you can pick them up for a great price. So the source for our tools is not about to go away, nor is the source for our materials likely to go away. You know, you walk into Home Depot, and Home Depot is not about woodworkers. Home Depot is about carpenters. Home Depot is about both professional and amateur remodelers that are making changes to homes. They need wood. They need other materials. Well, it just so happens that we can piggyback on that market, and we can get a lot of the supplies that we need from the same source that those people are getting the materials they need. And so there's little risk of anything happening to our source of supply, and really there's little risk of anything happening to make woodworking go away. But what about changes? Is woodworking changing? Absolutely. When I started in woodworking 50 years ago, you couldn't buy cordless power tools. They did not exist. The first drill I bought was a corded drill. I still have it. It was a Craftsman drill, 1/2-inch chuck, a tough old beast, heavy, still works. Don't use it, but it still works. The first cordless tool I ever bought was a Makita 7.2 volt, if you can believe that, cordless drill that used nickel cadmium batteries. Now, I've owned several other cordless drills since then that have increasingly gotten more powerful and better with battery systems. But that was the first one I had, and that was sometime, I'd say in the late 1970s. I can't tell you exactly when that I bought, or maybe in the early 1980s I bought that drill. That was the first cordless tool I owned. Now, I'd seen them around for a few years, but they were expensive. So that's one major change that's happened in woodworking through the years. Now we do almost everything, or at least a lot of things with cordless tools, to the point where I have people ask the question, well, I have a problem in that I'm going through batteries too fast. And my answer is, well, if you're going through batteries that fast, maybe you need a corded tool. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? If all you've ever owned is cordless tools, the idea of owning a corded tool may sound a bit strange. And to some people it does. I understand that. Okay, so change is happening and right now all around us. And change is going to continue. So let's talk about some of the ways that woodworking is changing and will be changing in the years to come. Now, the first area I want to talk about is design. You know, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of woodworkers that use three-dimensional design tools such as SketchUp. Now, SketchUp is put out, I believe, by Google, and the basic version is free online, and you can design furniture, you can design just about anything in it. I see a lot of woodworkers that use it. I've never taken the time to really learn. I'm still using pencil and paper because I've done that for 50 years. But a lot of people like doing that. Why do they like doing it? Well, they grew up in the computer age. You know, computers are something that came along when I was a young adult. The very first personal computer I worked with was an Radio Shack TRS-80 Model 1. I was a store manager for a Radio Shack store. They shipped us one in as a demo model, and we had to write our own software in BASIC for that computer. And we would demonstrate it to people, and it had a grand total of 16K of RAM. Now, if you want to pay a couple $100 extra, you could get the upgrade all the way up to 64K of RAM. Our permanent memory wasn't a hard drive, wasn't a floppy drive, it was a cassette tape. And of course, we're talking about a monochromatic monitor. Compared to the computers of today, it was nothing, but that broke open the doors for computers. I've been working with computers since the beginning, and they're a great tool, and they make things much easier, but I've never invested the time in learning how to use 3D software. I've told myself I'm going to. I've even bought 3D software, but I haven't learned how to use it. Okay? But we're finding that more and more people are using it, and especially in the younger generation who's grown up with computers and not had computers enter into their lives after they became adults. And to them, of course you're going to do it with a computer. Great. No, more power to them. There's a lot of benefits in doing your design work on a computer. One of them being that you can do your design work in 3D. I can do that on paper, but it's a little harder. Okay? So those tools are going to become more and more prevalent with more and more manufacturers putting them out, and I believe that they'll become easier to use, even while they will become more complex, meaning that they'll have more capability. But while they add that capability in, they're going to find ways of making it easier and more intuitive for the user to work with. And being intuitive is a major part of any software program being easy to work with. If you've got to take classes on how to use it, it's not intuitive, right? So I think that's one of the major ways we're going to see woodworking, and we already are seeing woodworking changing, is in designing things on the computer. And that's great. I have nothing against that whatsoever. Okay? They're also going to add functions into those design tools that are going to allow it to interface more and more with computer numerically controlled, CNC tools. And we'll talk more about CNC tools in a moment. But one of the things I saw in engineering, and it's been a while since I've been out of engineering, was the integration of computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing, meaning that you would design it on a computer using a CAD program, and then it would be transferred to a CAM program, computer-aided manufacturing, to run the machinery that would make the parts. And we're basically talking metal parts there. We're talking either mills machining the parts, or cutting metal, or bending metal, or punching holes in metal, whatever it might be, okay? The two together are called by the acronym CAD-CAM, C-A-D-C-A-M. We're going to see some of that more coming into the woodworking world as we see more computer-aided manufacturing or computer numerically controlled tools in woodworking, okay? But there's other ways that computer-aided drafting can help us as well, and that is in doing some things like creating our material list for us. Now, creating a material list can be rather tedious, but having a computer do it, when all the numbers are already in there, all the dimensions, is very easy. Not only that, but the computer can do an excellent job of figuring out how to lay out your cuts to maximize your material use and minimize your scrap. So that's a very useful thing that we can use computers for in our design process. Now, there's the other whole area of computer design, what we have going on now with AI. Yes, AI is trying to take over the world. And of course, there's been a lot of science fiction done about that, and we'll see whether or not any of it comes to life. We're already seeing AI being used in the furniture industry to design furniture. Is that better or is that worse? Well, that's a very much an opinion type thing. Can AI design things that a human can't? Well, that's a really good question. Some people would say yes, and some people would say no. From everything I know about AI, and remember I've been working with computers from the beginning, basically AI gets its knowledge by scouring the internet and seeing what humans have created on the internet. Okay? So yes, it might create designs that are unique, but they won't be beyond what humans can do. Okay, at least I don't think they will. Will we reach a point where they do? Absolutely. I believe that day is coming. I don't think we're there yet. Okay? Companies, furniture manufacturers, people who are designing homes, people who are designing kitchen cabinetry have already found uses for AI in the design process because they can put in specifications and let the AI create 50 or 100 designs for them which they can then weed out, pick the ones that are best, and then refine them. Okay, that's making an efficient use of AI. You know, the ethics of it, I'll leave that to you. I mean, it's, I have mixed feelings about that. I'm not a real huge fan of AI, but on the other hand, I can definitely see the advantage. If I'm doing it commercially, if I am a furniture manufacturer and I have 500 people working for me in a factory somewhere, I want to get the most bang for my buck. And part of getting the most bang for my buck is producing the most designs so I can find the best designs. Part of the design process is producing quantity so you can pick and choose through that and weed out the best or weed out the worst and keep the best. Okay? So yeah, I can see that happening. There's already some work going on where people are taking AI and they're trying to use it to create furniture reproductions. Now this isn't so much to create the reproduction itself as to create the design, create the plan. Some of the old furniture was built different ways than we build things today. Some of it's very complex, and trying to sit down and do a drawing of an old desk with lots of little cubby holes in it can be very challenging. Well, if we can get that information into a computer by, say, taking a photo and then reading the photo to find where the lines are, the edges are, and technology exists to do that, then the computer can then take that and turn it into actual building drawings, okay? So that's something that can be done. So there's a lot of ways that AI can be used very effectively to help in commercial woodworking. Now, is that going to affect you and I as hobbyists? I don't think so. I really don't see too many hobbyists turning over their design process to AI. There might be a few. I'm not saying no one will. There might be some that'll say, gee, I wonder if AI can improve upon this design I came up with. Let's try it. I don't know. You know, anything that's possible is likely to happen sometime. So, yeah, I'm sure some people will. Will the average woodworker have AI design things that they just build? I seriously doubt we're looking at that anytime in the near future. Next area I want to look at is the wood that we work with. Now, we've seen change already in the wood we work with. There's less and less of what's known as old growth timber available. These are the trees that have been around for years, maybe centuries. And a lot of them have been replaced by new growth. In other words, when they harvest, when they cut down those trees and they harvest them, they'll plant new trees, they'll plant seedlings. And they'll do whatever they can to help them grow faster so that they'll be able to be used, say, 50 years from now instead of 150 years from now. Well, part of the result of that is that we get wider growth rings and faster growth in those trees, which actually produces less dense lumber, or we could say lumber that isn't quite as strong. It makes it an appearance difference, and it also makes a strength difference. So that's a consideration. But some things, because of that, are getting, like, you really can't find, like ebony, for example. Now, you can still get ebony. But ebony, you used to buy ebony, and it was all old growth heartwood, and it was all black. Well, you go and try and buy ebony today, and it'll probably be a mix of black and brown because it's not old enough to be all black. It may not be all heartwood. It may be a mixture of heartwood and sapwood. But even the heartwood may not be all black because it's not old enough. So that's something that's been affected by the fact that we're using new growth as opposed to old growth lumber. Okay? At the same time, more and more species are being put on the endangered list. Ebony that I just mentioned is one of those. It's considered endangered, and it's getting harder and harder to buy ebony, and there's wood, rosewood's another one. Rosewood's a gorgeous wood, and I love rosewood, but you just about can't get rosewood because of the fact that it is getting, real rosewood, Brazilian rosewood, because it's getting harder and harder to come by because there's less and less trees out there, okay? So that's going to affect things. There's going to be more and more woods here in the future that it's just like, no, you really can't get that wood. You can't buy that. Well, okay, that's something that's going to happen, all right? As this happens, we're going to see some of the materials that we're accustomed to being changed and replaced by other materials. One of the ones I see coming is bamboo. Now we're starting to see bamboo more and more in some manufacturing operations. Like you'll see a lot of bamboo cutting boards. And they're good cutting boards. There's no question about it. Are they as pretty as an end grain cutting board? No, they're probably not. A handmade cutting board is going to have a much more intricate design than a bamboo cutting board. Nevertheless, bamboo is a good sturdy material. It grows quickly, and therefore it is an inexpensive material. And they now have bamboo plywood available. It's hard to get, but I see in the upcoming years that we're going to be able to go to the lumberyard and pick up bamboo plywood to use in building a piece of furniture. Or we may get hardwood plywood that's got a bamboo core instead of a softwood core. I see that coming too. You know, why? Because bamboo is less expensive, it's plentiful, it grows quickly, it's easy to work, and so that's something that I see coming. We can also expect to see other new engineered wood products. You know, MDF really hasn't been around all that long. Before MDF, everybody used particle board when they needed something cheap, and you can still get particle board, but in actuality, MDF is a better product than particle board is. They're both still have certain weaknesses, and they're definitely not as good as, say, just regular, 7-ply plywood or 5-ply plywood. But nevertheless, they are useful materials, and a lot of that low-cost furniture that I talked about earlier is made with MDF. So there's times to use it. I use some MDF for making fixtures and storage and things here in my workshop, and I have no problem using it. I don't use it for furniture that I'm building because I'm not trying to build cheap furniture. I'm trying to build good furniture. So it really depends on what you want. But I think we're going to see some more new engineered woods coming out in the future. What are they going to be? I can't tell you. I don't know yet. Tools and methods. That's something else that's changing. Power tools have largely taken over from hand tools. And hand tools, the hand tools that we consider the old hand tools, actually replaced even older hand tools. Okay? You go back in time, and woodworkers started off with a log. Sometimes they cut down the tree themselves. So then they had to peel the bark off of that log with a draw knife. Then they had to square up the log with an adze or a froe. No, it's usually an adze. A froe is usually for splitting shingles, and maybe a broad axe. And then they might split that into boards. They might saw into boards, but they might split it into boards with wedges. And then they would plane the wedges to smooth them out, or use, again, a froe to smooth them out somewhat. Woodworking's changed. Now, yes, in those old times, there were sawmills, and they would do the work. But sometimes, if there's no sawmill nearby, you do it yourself. So today, we do things with power tools. And like I said, I consider myself a power tool woodworker. I predominantly use power tools. I don't own every power tool there is, but that's the way I do most of my working. I use hand tools when it's more convenient. Okay, what about the future? Well, in the 50 years I've been doing this, I've seen a lot of new tools come out. Trim routers. Trim routers are a relatively new invention when you compare them to regular routers. And in fact, the plunge router is a newer invention than the fixed base router. Okay? What happens is that engineers look at the problems, look at the tools that are out there, or look at the way people are woodworking, and they say, there's got to be a better way. And that's what engineers do. They look at that as a problem, and they find a solution. And so you get companies like, say, Ryobi, that have, or Milwaukee, either one of them, that have over 300 cordless power tools in their lineup. Why? Because they're designed to do a wide variety of different things, some of which nobody ever thought they needed 20 years ago. Nobody would have thought of 20 years ago. Or if they needed to do that task, they do it with a different kind of tool. So new tools are constantly coming out. It will constantly continue to happen. And what they'll be doing is they'll be making more and more complex tasks into tasks that you can do with a specialty power tool. And that's good, and that's beneficial. Cutting a mortise, for example, at one time meant cutting it out with a chisel by hand. Well, okay, then that got replaced with drill holes and clean it up with a chisel. Well, nowadays, in a furniture factory, mortises are cut using a mortising machine, which uses a hollow square chisel. It's got a drill inside it. And you can actually do that on a drill press too. There's an adapter you can buy that turns your drill press effectively into a mortising machine. It's not quite as good as a real mortising machine, but I've used it and it works. Okay, so that's an advancement. What's the next step? Well, probably the next step will be, well, we already have the next step. It's the domino. The domino is essentially a mortise that's cut in a matter of seconds. Okay, you just cut the mortise into both sides. Instead of a mortise and tendon, you have two mortises and a double-ended tendon that we call the domino. That's an advancement in tools. That's an advancement in techniques. It makes it easier to do the same job faster and still end up with quality. But not only do we see new tools being developed, we see new ways of using old tools. The table saw. I did a video here a while back on upgrades for your table saw, and a good half a dozen of those upgrades were jigs that you can make for your own table saw to improve the functionality of your table saw. Things like a crosscut sled and a miter sled or a tenoning jig. Well, these are things that a lot of woodworkers make now. Well, that's great, and they're useful, and it makes it possible to do more things with the table saw and do them safer. But you know something? 50 years ago when I started, nobody had ever heard of those things. They're newer ideas for older tools. So tools change as people come up with new ideas. The same tools. So using them, creating those new methods to use our old tools is great. But then there's new tools too. And there's a few specific new tools I want to talk about here that are either in existence or are coming into existence. The first one is laser cutting and engraving. Now, I've got a laser engraver, and yes, you can cut material. I can cut wood up to, I think it's 10 millimeters or 11 millimeters thick with that. I usually just use it for engraving, but like if I'm engraving, say, a plaque or something like that, I'll cut the outline with it as well. And but you can find things. You can find wood items, little wood kits online, model kits that are all done laser cut. It's done out of thin plywood, and they use a laser engraver to cut through the wood and make pieces that pop out and snap together. And so how is that going to affect woodworking? Well, maybe you need curved parts for something you're building, and it would be easier to get the laser engraver to cut those parts out and then just sand off the burnt parts. You know, things like that. So that's the first really new technology I see being applied to woodworking in, say, the last 10 years, maybe a little longer. That's really changing woodworking. And as I said, I've got one. I use it. I don't use it a lot, but I found it a great way to embellish projects that I'm doing. You know, a lot of woodworkers, and specifically I'm referring to woodworkers that make items for sale at, say, you know, local fairs and things like that, will offer that service of custom engraving. So they might make end grain butcher block cutting boards, and they'll engrave your family's name on them or something like that, okay? So things like that can be done. I've even seen tables, like live edge tables, where they engraved a company's logo right into the tabletop. So things like that. The next one, and this is just coming into its own right now, is CNC routing. Now, usually you just see this referred to as a CNC, okay? CNC stands for computer numerically controlled. The technology of CNC has been around for, I'd say, at least 40 years. We had some CNC mills in the machine shop back when I was in engineering, okay? But the idea of a CNC router is a much newer idea. And basically what you have is you have an XY automated or computer-controlled gantry with a router in it, and so it'll control the height of the bit and the direction so that it can cut out parts or even do carving work for you. There's some people that are doing this more and more. You see it, and you see a lot of advertising for CNCs, and you even see occasionally people talking about building your own. Okay. I've got to admit, I've got a little bit of a problem with the idea of CNC routers in woodworking, because to me, the process of woodworking is me as a woodworker creating the part, okay? Instead of a machine creating the part. Now, does that mean that the guy that does that is wrong? No, it just means it's not for me. If that's for you, that's great. Go ahead and do it. You know, you've got to find out what works for you. And there are woodworkers that like using CNC, especially like for cutting curved parts or parts that might be difficult in other ways to cut, or where high precision is needed. Again, like I've seen carving done on CNC. I've seen some beautiful carving done on CNC. Well, to me, in a way, that kind of cheapens the whole idea of somebody that is knowledgeable in carving something out. But then again, you can always just tell them, yeah, it was done on a machine, or this was done by hand, okay? So I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's a direction we can see woodworking taking. And it might be 50 years from now that a lot of woodworkers Their idea of woodworking is programming their CNC to cut out all the material, and all they do is assemble it. And if that's what they want to do, that's their right. Now, I also think that we're going to see CNC applied to other tools, and specifically I'm thinking here the table saw. But the technology of CNC can be applied pretty much to any tool. I think it would be useful at times to have a table saw that could be, you just punch in a list of numbers to it and it sets up every cut for you. I actually saw a video online of a guy who's created one, a table saw, his own table saw, that he can load from the computer and he'll set up his cuts for him. That if you're trying to do production work, that could save a lot of time. Again, it's the same thing of, okay, how much is the machine doing the work and how much are you doing the work? But you know, it's something that's coming, and it's something that I think we'll see more of in the future. And then finally, the last one I mentioned is 3D printing. Now, I thought when I came up with the idea of putting 3D printing on here, that no, it's not happening yet. I was wrong. There's already some companies online that you can buy 3D printed decorative parts for your projects. We're talking about things like fanels, okay? Why not? I mean, if you can break the wood down into fiber to make MDF, why can't you shoot that through a jet and create a whatever 3D object? They're doing 3D printing of more and more different things out of more and more different types of materials. They're starting to build 3D homes, 3D buildings, especially with a nozzle that's extruding a specific blend of concrete and just piling that up and letting it set. And so, yeah, I think we're going to see more and more 3D printing. Is it going to invade the hobbyist area? I don't know. You know, I see a potential that you can do some really wild freeform or abstract artistic carving this way, things that will be very hard to do by hand, but we'll just have to see where it ends up going. So, to sum this all up, where's woodworking going? Where's the future? Well, first of all, the most important part is it's going to be around for a long, long time. And you and I will be training the next generation, or maybe I should say you will be training the next generation, because I may not be around then, and teaching them how to do the things that we know how to do. And you'll be learning new techniques that you will then pass on to them, and maybe they'll learn new techniques that you don't know that they'll pass backwards to you. We're going to see new things coming. We're going to see probably some things created that we might never have been able to imagine because they're beyond our capability. At the same time, we're going to see some people that are going to stick with the old ways and say, let me show you how it used to be done. Isn't this amazing what they used to be able to do with such primitive tools? And all in all, it's all about you and I making sawdust. So let's go out there and make some sawdust, and let's become part of the future of woodworking.